again, in terms of the result of the practice of Aikido, you could say, in terms of Aikido as, let's call it a martial art, Aikido as developing a kind of strength which would be a certain level of warrior's strength. Although that strength is spiritual in Aikido, it's still connected to this. So since they talked about the spirit of loving protection of all things, of all. Loving protection, right? So one's energy is the energy of loving protection of all. One can imagine that kind of energy coming from, religious traditions or religious spiritual practices, but we're talking about in terms of Aikido. So that the energy and strength, the energy and charisma, the energy and power, which come through the practice of Aikido should translate into this feeling of loving protection for all. To take this natural tendency that living things have to maximize their life energy. In Aikido, this is not done in any terms of competition with another, where I win, they lose, in any way. At this time in human history, for purposes of power, for purposes of self, loving protection of all things is not what human beings are doing. So in all of this, there is Aikido, which shows that the logic of war, the logic of competition or scarcity, the logic of self and other is false. And false in the very context where it would seem to be supreme, that is conflict. Conflict which could be considered life and death conflict. So, my conclusion about this is, well then, Aikido is worth putting time and energy into, not only for oneself, but certainly the practice of Aikido starts with oneself, and the experience of Aikido starts with oneself. For instance, in the full Chikon Shishin no Ho, which translates as quieting the soul and returning to the divine, which was a combination of practices that O-sensei proposed to do, people to do in the beginning of practice. The last thing that you did after you had done the different practices which would quiet your soul and connect with the divine, connect to the origin, connect to the beginning before the separation of heaven and earth. At that point, you would, by using a ki and a movement like this, which was similar to a sword movement, purify, at one point, all 28 directions, or all 8 directions, or all 4 directions at least, of the universe, before you practiced. Before you began practicing, you would do practices which would open yourself spiritually, Chikon Shishin no Ho.